All right. Some of these terms we've heard before: cost, cost object, cost accumulation is new, cost assignment is new. Each of these terms have very specific meaning. We want to be careful with our usage. A cost, fairly straightforward, is simply a sacrifice of giving up resources for a particular purpose. Uh, Very straightforward. Cost object. In previous sessions, back in unit number 9, the primary cost object we discussed was either a product like circuit boards or a service like providing accounting services, audit services. However, in a company, there are many things that could be a cost object. One might be customers themselves, where we want to identify what is the cost of servicing each of our customers. We can also ask questions whether or not a customer is profitable or not. Sometimes we identify customers that, after we perform a cost analysis, customers who we need to eliminate. We're simply not making a profit from servicing them. But there's other cost objects such as order processing. This could be the processing of sales orders from customers. That too can be a cost object. Cost accumulation, collecting costs by some natural classification such as materials or labor. And then cost assignment. And cost assignment, there are two different types of cost assignments. They sound similar, but they're very, very different. The first one is tracing. Some costs are easily identified with a cost object. Cost object may be a product we're producing, a service we're providing. It may be something like a customer or a vendor. But costs are easily identified with the cost object, such as product or service. Assigning these costs to the cost object is easy. Literally, it's easy to identify the quantity of materials, the quantity of labor associated with the cost object. Okay, so direct costs can be identified specifically and exclusively with a given object in an economical, feasible manner. For example, direct materials are easily traced to the manufacturing of a specific product. Think back to the video that I hope you watched on wheel coaches. The first department they showed you was the sheet metal department. There's a worker in there that's cutting up sheet metal that goes into constructing a wheel coach. Clearly, the materials that are being cut up at that time are easily identified with a specific job that's being performed, a specific wheel coach that's going to be produced. Same thing with labor. If that worker punched in when he started cutting sheet metal for a particular wheel coach and then clocked out when he finished all the sheet metal for a coach, we can easily capture and trace that labor time spent on a particular job, on a particular wheel coach. Now, other costs are not as easily traced to a cost object. Some costs have to be allocated. For these costs, management must develop rational and logical methods for allocating costs to different products and services. So once again, think of wheel coaches and that first department, sheet metal. There was a very large, expensive looking machine being used to cut up the sheet metal. No doubt that machine is either rented or being depreciated over time. Clearly, that resource is being used as the sheet metal is produced and the wheel coaches produced. Now, can we trace the use of that machine to a particular wheel coach? Not really. I mean, we may come up with a systematic, rational way of allocating the rent on that machine or the depreciation of that machine. It may be something like, well, the labor hours spent using that machine, clearly those labor hours are tied to the usage of that machine, and that would be a rational, logical way to allocate um, uh, the rent or depreciation on that machine. However, even though it's rational and logical, doesn't mean it's not the same as easily tracing the use of that resource. That would be an allocation of that resource, allocation of that cost. All right, so indirect cost cannot be identified specifically or exclusively with a given cost object in an economically feasible way. As I just discussed, rent for manufacturing facilities cannot be traced to the manufacturing of a specific product. However, we can come up with rational, logical methods for allocating rent to units produced. In summary, direct costs are physically traceable to a cost object, and by often direct costs tend to be variable costs, as we discussed back in in unit number 9. Variable costs include things like direct materials, direct labor, but also variable overhead like electricity. However, variable costs are not the same as direct costs. It is possible to have some fixed costs that are easily traceable to a cost object, therefore they're direct. Indirect costs do tend to be fixed. It may be the rent on a machinery, it may be depreciation of a facility, it may be supervisor salaries. We can identify rational, logical methods for allocating those costs, but they are allocated. They're not easily traced to a cost object. Once again, indirect costs tend to be fixed, but not all fixed costs are indirect. Sometimes we have fixed costs that are easily traceable to a cost object. In that case, those fixed costs are in fact direct costs. Okay, so to summarize, as you go forward, please keep in mind that there are two dimensions here. One is variable costs and fixed costs that we discussed extensively in Unit 9. The other dimension is direct costs and indirect costs, which we're now discussing in Unit 10.